What's going on, guys? It's Rob from Heroes Avenue. Hope you guys are all having a great day today. In this video, we're talking DC news. Specifically, we're talking about my favorite parts of the interviews from Shazam set visits, and we are talking Wonder Woman 3 and my ideas for the trilogy, and we are going to talk about the state of the comic book industry as well through one article, so let's get into it. Okay, guys, we really do have two big things to talk about today, and that is the Shazam set visit held by multiple outlets and a Wonder Woman 3 under Patty Jenkins. So we're going to definitely talk about those cool things, but I did want to start things off on a little bit of a less positive note, just because I think it's relevant to us DC fans. So Cosmic Book News has an article titled Justice League Failure Blamed for DC Layoffs. So there's some bad things happening behind the scenes right now at DC and Warner Brothers. Some of these things include at least a 3% of its workforce being laid off and 10% of Warner Brothers Consumer Products Division being let go. And in this article, these changes are talked about by a man, Ethan Van Sciver, who's a former DC and Green Lantern comic book artist and is a 26-year veteran of the business. He posts a video on YouTube to talk about these changes and how Justice League was essentially to blame for some of the bad things happening behind the scenes. But he also does talk about the state of the comic book industry. So I'm not going to read the whole thing right now, but I am going to definitely go through some points. I'll definitely leave a link to this article in the description below. But he goes on to talk about how the failure of Justice League was catastrophic for Warner Brothers and DC. And, going into this movie, Zack Snyder had a $350 million budget. By the time he exited and Joss Whedon took over, Joss Whedon had asked for $300 million more. Definitely catapults the budget up to around $700 million. And the fact that this movie lost so much money, it really had a lot of repercussions for not only the higher ups but a lot of good working people as well. So that really is the saddest part of this movie. All those working people who worked really hard behind the scenes, they had to pay for this catastrophe that was Justice League. And not one person is to blame really, and a lot of people tend to blame Joss Whedon himself. But I'm not going to completely put all of the blame on him, because definitely a lot of other higher ups were to blame as well, and we will never know the complete story. So it's just a really sad situation. But I think even a sadder situation right now is the fact that Ethan also goes on to talk about the state of the comic book industry, how he says he's lived through at least two times in his life where the comic book industry was at its lowest point, and he said today is actually the worst it's been, at least in his experience, and that both DC and Marvel, they have business practices that are not conducive to creating more fans or as a business itself. So, and he goes on to talk about how comic book stores are closing down, and he really just drives home the point that the state of the comic book industry is not very good right now. And it really sucks because, the comic book industry is the one that is pumping out the stories that we love and that we're seeing adapted into movies that we love. So it just really sucks to hear this. And I am by no means a business expert. All I can say as a fan, and all I can say as a fan to you guys is, support your local businesses. And this is something I try to do all the time. I'm working with my local comic book shop right now to put together my superhero race that I'm sure you've heard me talk about in previous videos. If you haven't heard me talk about it, you'll probably see more of it in future videos that I do. But yeah, support your local businesses, guys. Go to your local comic book shop, find a character you like, and pick up some issues and support them. I'm sure it's not going to solve the systemic problems of the comic book industry, but it will help your local business. So that's all I can say about that. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Shazam now. At this point, I know you guys are incredibly hyped for this movie, and that last teaser trailer is probably one of the reasons to blame for the jump in excitement for this movie. And I felt it online. I felt it literally coming off my phone or my screen that I'm looking at, the excitement that you guys have. So several news outlets have been lucky enough to visit the set of Shazam, set in Philadelphia, but filmed in Toronto. And I gotta say, how lucky are these guys to go and get to see the actual sets and movie magic happening in front of their eyes? Anyways, These outlets all have their own lists of what they learned on the set of Shazam, but I don't really want to talk about all that they learned, and I did read through it. Since we don't have long to wait until the movie comes out, and quite frankly, I'd like to see the movie play out in front of my eyes instead of reading to you guys what these guys learned, because some of you guys might really consider it spoiler. So instead of talking about what people learned on the set visits, I want to talk about and highlight some of the cool excerpts from some of the interviews that were held with key players revolving around this movie, and namely those players are Zachary Levi and David F Sandberg. So first, these are just little highlights of what reporters got to ask them and some of their answers. I will leave a link to the Heroic Hollywood interviews in the comments below. In the description below. So the first thing I thought was really cool to talk about was how Zachary Levi almost passed up on the role of Shazam. I'm going to kind of summarize Zachary Levi's answer to this because he has quite a lengthy story about it. It's pretty inspiring, and I'll quote him at the end of it. But he essentially talks about how he had an appointment set up to audition for Shazam, the lead role of Shazam, and he knew ahead of time that The Rock had been casted as Black Adam, so his first reaction is, why the hell are they sending him to this right now? He emailed back to them saying that, aren't you guys looking for one, or A, massive stars, or at the very least, B, someone who's a massive person? You know, he's not someone who knew a lot about Captain Marvel or Shazam at the time, but at the very least, he knew that, hey, aren't you guys looking for someone, someone with a bigger name or a bigger guy than me? So he sent an email back saying, he was going to pass on it. So basically a few weeks passed and some time went by, and he got another audition for an ancillary role, something, kind of a smaller role that he thought he could do. And he shot his audition tape for it, sent it in, and essentially his agents call him back and say, hey, remember that lead role in Shazam that you passed up on a few weeks ago? They want you to come in and to go for this role. And he's to his surprise, he goes, wow, okay. And he goes in to audition for it. And a few days later, he's at the gym and he gets a call from David F Sandberg. And David F Sandberg just goes, "You're my Shazam." And he thinks it's absolutely insane. And the end of his quote says this: "There was definitely a part of me that felt like, oh, maybe I'm never really going to have my shot at something like this, because you need to be, one of the crises, either starting super ripped or super moody or super sexy, whatever that is. I always felt like I was more of an every guy. I felt like I was following in a Tom Hanks kind of trajectory. But then when I realized that I was genuinely making something between Superman and Big, I was like, damn, this is a dream job. I couldn't have prayed or thought about this more. So that's how I became me in this." So again, I think it's a really inspiring story about how Zachary Levi almost passed up on the role, and just how you guys, take your chances out there in life, because you never know what it'll lead to. So I thought it's pretty inspiring, especially because I do follow him on Instagram, and he's a very, very spiritual person, and you don't have to be spiritual to be to take note of the lessons in these things. So I thought that was really cool. And one other thing from his interviews that I thought was cool was something that some of you guys brought up in the comments in the past, and some of you guys have commented on, hey, he is a 14-year-old boy who becomes a man. And in the trailers, hey, he doesn't seem like he has the wisdom of Solomon. So again, I know it's been handled differently in the comics, and handled in certain ways in the comics. Like he has to call on the wisdom of Solomon before he can actually utilize it. But Zachary Levi had this question as well. So I'm going to go ahead and read this answer. So when on how he balances playing a 14-year-old boy with the wisdom of Solomon, he says, "I asked this question of David at the camera test, or maybe right before it, having done the research on the character and being like, how's this going to work? If you have read the New 52, it does take a little license with that. In fact, I don't think it's the only version of Captain Marvel or Shazam that's taken license with this essentially paradox. Essentially, what was settled on is the idea that while some of these powers, or these namesakes and powers, be it Hercules or Atlas or what have you, are a little more evident as Billy's becoming Captain Marvel / Shazam. I think some of those are more evident. With the wisdom, it's not quite as evident. He's growing into that. I think a little bit, it's magic. But he does show his wisdom, I think, in certain areas throughout the movie where you see him make a decisive move, or he does something where you go, oh, that would be more wisdom of Solomon type of thing. That's all I got on that. I think better ask the people who are above my pay grade. So there you have it. Yes, I know it's not a complete answer to the question of how he's going to call on the wisdom of Solomon, but I think it's really cool how Zachary Levi has the same questions as us fans. At the same time, I don't think all of these answers or these questions need to be answered in a trailer. I think some people get really nitpicky in the comment section sometimes on, hey, how does this work or how's that going to work? It doesn't make sense. Hey guys, just watch the movie, wait till it comes out, and even if in the movie that question doesn't necessarily get answered, I think that's sometimes cool. Not every question needs to get answered, and not answered in a trailer in particular. But, that's sometimes part of the cool things about movies. I know some people live to find plot holes in movies. That's not me. I just go to the movies to enjoy them for the most part. That's me being a fan first, and then you can dissect those little things later. Again, I'm not going to be bogged down by that question, but let me know what you guys thought of his answer in the comments below. And in other parts of his interview here, he goes on to say some cool little tidbits. He even expresses what all of us fans have been feeling about Henry Cavill, mainly that he is still our Superman and that all of us are in love with him in the role. And whether that remains to be the case in the future remains to be seen. But yeah, this wasn't the whole interview here, just the most interesting parts of what I found for Zachary Levi. But we can also go on to David F Sandberg, and I definitely found some interesting parts of David F Sandberg's comments. And first one being the reporter asking, you kind of briefly touched on it, and it's something that we keep hearing a lot about, is the tone of the movie. So, can you break it down, maybe in your terms, what you consider the tone? Sandberg says, it's sort of it's a fun movie. It's not a pure comedy, because you still have those. Touches some pretty dark subjects and some pretty scary monsters. But it's more of, I like to compare it to 80s movies, like Goonies and Ghostbusters and Back to the Future. That sort of oh, it's a family kind of, it's not dark and gritty. Okay, there it is. That's kind of a chopped up quote of what David F. Sandberg had to say about it. So a few things I like about it. I definitely like how he doesn't call it a pure comedy. I like how it's going to be a mixed tone, but it's going to be a really fun movie, and fun feels like what it should be for this character of Shazam. And I like how he's comparing it to 80s movies. I think there's a lot of nostalgia for the 80s going on right now. And funny enough, he compares it to Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters is about to get a reboot. People are always talking about Back to the Future reboots, but I like how we're going to get a modern day version of an 80s movie, what it feels like to be an 80s movie right here. So I think that's cool. Of course, it looks cool for family. It doesn't have to be dark and gritty. Of course, it has to match what the character is, and what we've gotten so far feels like what the Shazam movie should feel like. So again, it's cool how it's going to be an 80s movie. I feel like it would be a great transition into a Wonder Woman 1984, since Wonder Woman 1984 is going to take place in the 80s, I think, and we'll talk about more of that in a second. But lastly, I want to talk about how David F. Sandberg, how obviously he's gone from doing small budget movies into a big franchise like this. It could be quite an undertaking, and here's what he had to say about that. Yeah, it's quite a marathon. It's a lot of work. Yeah, it's a very different way of working, just because you have to do all the previs and plan everything out months in advance. And then when you're shooting it, it's not always as fun as shooting a smaller movie, because you have to shoot, today we're shooting this little piece and this little piece, because this piece is second unit, this is on blue screen, this is CGI. It's a lot of things to keep track of. So the shooting is not always fun, but the result is so much more awesome than when you have these kinds of resources. So yeah, it's been a lot of work. I mean, especially now we're shooting main unit during the day and second unit is shooting during the night. And I want to be a part of as much of it as possible. So I'm not getting a lot of sleep, but we're doing some cool stuff. So again, I'm going to leave the link to the Heroic Hollywood interviews in the comments below. But yeah, instead of going through the spoilery type things, I just wanted to highlight some of the cool things they said in the interview. I definitely think it's cool to see into the mind of David F. Sandberg and what he's going through, especially being a small director going to this big project. So that's really cool. Hopefully the movie turns out awesome and we get more of David F. Sandberg in the future. But let's go ahead and move on to the Wonder Woman topic. So Patty Jenkins recently sat down with Vanity Fair and shared more about the sequel, Wonder Woman 1984, and how she plans for a third film. Here's what she had to say, very short quote. I have pretty clear plans for Wonder Woman 3, whether I direct it or not. I see how her arc should end in my incarnation of Wonder Woman. I have a great passion for that. So, again, she goes on to say other things in the interview, but that's the one thing a lot of headlines are talking about for sure. And I'm not going to speculate on whether or not she's going to direct it and what that means. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about where I think it would be cool for this trilogy to end. And I definitely want to hear your opinion on this, and maybe if you guys have your own ideas, I think that would be cool. But I think this trilogy should go the way of The Dark Knight, just like Christopher Nolan did his trilogy. And I'm not saying follow it beat for beat, and I'm not saying to copy the tone, obviously. I'm not saying for it to be super dark and gritty or whatever you want to call those movies. I just like the idea of bringing back a villain like what happened in the Dark Knight trilogy. So initially in Batman Begins, well, Ra's al Ghul ends up being the first villain. He goes out, and the ramifications of him dying comes back to him in The Dark Knight Rises in his enemy Talia al Ghul. Now, I'm not saying, again, it doesn't have to follow that beat for beat, but I'm saying that if we could bring Ares back into the fold somehow, that would be awesome. So I thought Ares as a villain was a little underserved in the third act of Wonder Woman. I thought being one of her main villains, I thought the way he went out, it didn't do it for me. With her smashing her forearms together and killing him with one blast, the whole, love speech, that part didn't do it for me. But I think it would be great if he does return for a Wonder Woman 3. I definitely think there is room there. Whatever happens in Wonder Woman 1984, I do think there is a way that you can tie in the Ares villain and have her go at Wonder Woman for one last time. And I think it would be great. I think having two villains in the movie would be great as well. I know this movie is going to have Maxwell Lord as well as Cheetah. So whether I'm not sure if any of those two are going to survive and make it into the third movie, but I think that would be, it's kind of a skeleton idea of where my mind's going for Wonder Woman 3, but it's an idea, and I think it'd be really cool to bring Ares back. So just like the Ra's al Ghul and the League of Shadows are return as a villain in the Dark Knight trilogy, I would like Ares to return as a villain to end off Patty Jenkins' trilogy, whether she directs it or not. So that's my idea, and that's my thoughts on where Wonder Woman 3 can go. Definitely, I'm sure you guys have some ideas of where it could possibly go, especially if you're big Wonder Woman fans. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about that. And that's all for today, guys. Okay, guys, that's it for this video. Definitely let me know what you guys think about the topics we discussed, especially about your Wonder Woman 3 or Wonder Woman trilogy ideas. I want to hear those, and I will definitely try to address them in reading the comments video, hopefully coming soon. So if you haven't already, guys, give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell for more videos like this, and I will catch you guys later. Have a good night. Peace.